We're taking the house, the cars, and all your savings, my daughter and ex-husband shockingly declared. My lawyer said, "We have no chance." I calmly replied, "I have a plan." At the final court hearing, I was completely composed, while their lawyer suddenly turned pale upon seeing that very document. Betrayal won't go unpunished. The consequences for them will be devastating. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. The wine bottle was still cold in my hands when my daughter told me I should die faster. "Mom, let's be realistic here," Jasmine said, leaning back in her chair at my dining table. "You're 65. You've got what, maybe 15 good years left? Probably less with your stress levels." I set the Cabernet Sauvignon on the table, the same table I'd built with my own hands in 1999, back when this house was just studs and dreams. Marcus, my ex-husband, sat across from me, his fingers wrapped around a glass of my whiskey. He hadn't poured himself one in the 8 years since our divorce. Tonight, apparently, was special. "What Jasmine means," Marcus said in that smooth voice he used when he wanted something, "is that we've been thinking about the future. Your future. Our future." "Fascinating," I said. I didn't realize we had a shared future anymore. The divorce papers from 2017 suggested otherwise. Jasmine's jaw tightened. At 38, she still had the same look she'd had as a teenager when I caught her stealing 20s from my wallet. Defiant, entitled, convinced she deserved whatever she took. "That's exactly what we need to discuss." Marcus slid a manila envelope across the table. "We filed this morning. I didn't touch it. 30 years as an IRS auditor taught me that documents people slide toward you are never good news." Instead, I watched his face. The slight upturn of his lips. The way his eyes kept darting to Jasmine for reassurance. They'd rehearsed this, probably for weeks. "Filed what exactly?" "A lawsuit," Jasmine said, unable to contain herself. "We're claiming the house, the cars, and half your retirement. Dad says you promised him everything during the divorce." I let that sentence hang in the air for a moment. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a 1934 Howard Miller I'd restored myself, ticked 11 times before I spoke. "I promised him everything," I repeated. "During the divorce, when we were dividing assets in front of lawyers and a judge." "You promised him privately," Jasmine said. "Verbally. We have witnesses. Witnesses to a private conversation. 3 of them. Dad's friends were there." I looked at Marcus. He had the decency to avoid my eyes, staring instead at the whiskey he'd helped himself to. 8 years ago, I let him stay in this house temporarily because he said he had nowhere to go. 8 years of paying the mortgage on a property I couldn't live in. 8 years of watching my daughter move in with him, neither of them paying a dime in rent. "The house is worth $847,000 now," Jasmine continued. "The F-150 and the Accord together are worth about $52,000, and your IRS pension account has $312,000. We're only asking for half the pension. We think that's fair." "Fair," I said. "You're going to die eventually, Mom. Why make this difficult?" There it was. The thing I'd always suspected but never heard out loud. To my daughter, I was already a corpse, just one that hadn't stopped breathing yet. I stood up slowly, picked up the wine bottle I'd brought, and tucked it under my arm. "Ernestine," Marcus started, "please don't make a scene." "A scene." I buttoned my jacket with deliberate calm. "Marcus, I've spent 30 years watching people lie about money. I've seen doctors hide offshore accounts, CEOs cry about expenses they invented, and small business owners swear their cash registers were broken for tax season. You know what all of them had in common? They all thought they were smarter than the paperwork." Marcus's face flickered just for a moment with something that might have been doubt. But Jasmine stepped in, her chin jutting forward with that familiar arrogance. "You can't scare us with your IRS stories, Mom. This isn't a tax audit. This is family court. Different rules." "Rules," I repeated, savoring the word. You want to talk about rules? In the house I built, at the table I made with my own hands, while drinking my whiskey and demanding my money. Jasmine's smirk faltered just slightly. Good. I walked to the door, the one I'd installed in 1999, and paused with my hand on the knob. You'll hear from my lawyer, I said. You don't have a lawyer, Jasmine called out. I checked. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I sat in my Ford F-150 for 20 minutes, watching the lights in the windows of the house I'd built. The house where I'd carried Marcus over the threshold. The house where Jasmine took her first steps. The house that, according to the envelope I still hadn't opened, no longer belonged to me. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I'd found a lawyer on Google earlier that week. Brian Mills, some young guy with a 3-star rating and reasonable rates. I'd hoped I wouldn't need him. I dialed. Mills Law Office. This is Brian. Mr. Mills, my name is Ernestine Washington. I believe I'm about to be in a significant amount of legal trouble. I explained the situation in the same methodical tone I'd used in thousands of audit interviews. The house, the alleged promise, the witnesses, the daughter who thought my death was taking too long. When I finished, the line was silent for nearly 30 seconds. Ms. Washington, Brian Mills finally said, I'll be honest with you. This is going to be a difficult case. Very difficult. The office of Brian Mills was exactly what a 3-star Google rating would suggest. A converted storage space above a dry cleaner, with a desk that wobbled and diplomas hung slightly crooked on wood-paneled walls. They're claiming you made an oral promise to transfer the house to Marcus in exchange for him not pursuing your federal pension. Brian pushed a stack of papers toward me. Dated July 15, 2017. They have 3 witnesses willing to testify under oath. Kevin Patterson, Raymond Morris, and Michael Freeman. I read from the document. Marcus's poker buddies. You know them. They've been lying for Marcus since before my marriage ended. Raymond told me to my face that Marcus was at his house the night I found hotel receipts in Marcus's coat pocket. I flipped to the next page. What's the second filing? Brian's face went a shade paler. Your daughter filed separately. She's claiming emotional distress and psychological damage from alleged mistreatment during her childhood. She's asking for $200,000 in damages. The number should have shocked me. Instead, I thought about a summer afternoon in 1994 when Jasmine was 7 years old. We'd been at Grant Park, just the 2 of us. She wanted ice cream, and I'd said she had to finish her sandwich first. Standard parenting. She threw the sandwich into the duck pond and announced she hated me. I bought her the ice cream anyway. I bought her everything anyway. The car when she was 16, the apartment deposit when she was 22, the business loan of $12,000 when she was 29, which she'd never mentioned again. Ms. Washington. Brian was staring at me. Combined total, $1.2 million, give or take. He straightened the papers that didn't need straightening. I have to be honest with you, ma'am. This isn't my area of expertise. Family law, property disputes. I mostly handle DUIs and minor contract issues. You need someone with more experience. You're telling me you can't help. I'm telling you I don't know how to fight this. He looked genuinely sorry, which was almost worse than if he'd been indifferent. We don't have a chance, Ms. Washington. Not against these claims. Not with witnesses. I'm sorry. I drove to my temporary apartment, a 1-bedroom unit on South Loop that cost $1,850 a month. I'd rented it 2 years ago when the atmosphere at the house became unbearable. Marcus's passive-aggressive comments about his space, making every visit feel like trespassing in my own property. The apartment was sparse. A couch, a television I rarely watched, and a folding table I used as a desk. I'd brought my laptop and my files, decades of financial records I'd kept out of professional habit. I sat down and opened the laptop. Numbers never lie. People lie constantly, creatively, and with tremendous confidence. But numbers, if you follow them carefully, will always tell you the truth. I started with Marcus's filing. July 15, 2017, the date of the alleged oral promise. I pulled up my calendar from that year, a digital copy I'd synced from my old IRS computer. July 15, 2017, National Tax Conference, Milwaukee Convention Center. I remembered that conference. 3 days of presentations about updated audit procedures, rubber chicken dinners, and a hotel room with a view of nothing. I'd kept the receipts. Of course I kept every receipt. 30 years of auditing teaches you that documentation is the difference between winning and losing. On July 15, 2017, at the exact moment I supposedly promised Marcus at my house, I was 90 miles away, checking into a hotel in Milwaukee. 3 witnesses were prepared to swear I was somewhere I couldn't have been. I leaned back in my chair and felt something I hadn't felt in days, a smile. The clock on my laptop read 3:14 a.m. I'd been working for 6 hours, cross-referencing dates and building timelines. Marcus's story had its first crack, a hairline fracture invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But I was looking. I thought about Jasmine's face at dinner, the casual way she discussed my death. I thought about Marcus pouring my whiskey like he still lived here, which technically he did, in a house I paid for and couldn't enter. I thought about 30 years of tracking money through shell companies, overseas accounts, and falsified receipts. I thought about the people who'd sat across from me in IRS interview rooms, sweating through their lies, convinced they'd outsmarted the system. None of them ever did. First lie, I said to the empty apartment. There will be others. I opened a new document and began to type. Not legal arguments. I'd leave those to a real lawyer once I found one. Instead, I typed questions, the questions I'd ask if this were an audit, the inconsistencies I'd probe, the places where the numbers didn't match the story. Marcus thought he knew me. He thought 8 years of living in my house, spending my tolerance, had taught him how I operated. But he'd only ever seen Ernestine the wife, Ernestine the mother, Ernestine the woman who bought ice cream for a girl who threw sandwiches at ducks. He'd never seen Ernestine the auditor. By morning, I had a list of 17 questions and a plan taking shape in my mind. I spent 3 days researching lawyers in Chicago the way I used to research tax evaders. Methodically, thoroughly, and without mercy. The first 2 attorneys I called wanted retainers of $15,000 just to review the case. The third didn't return my call. The fourth suggested I settle. These family disputes rarely go well for the defendant, Ms. Washington. I thanked him for his time and crossed his name off my list. On day 3, I found Terrence Harper. His profile on Avu showed a 4.9 rating out of 5 stars, with a specialization in property disputes and real estate litigation. The reviews used words like surgical, relentless, and worth every penny. One former client wrote, he found holes in the opposing counsel's case that no one else would have seen. He charged $450 an hour. I made an appointment for the next morning. His office was on the 15th floor of a glass tower on Michigan Avenue, a different universe from Brian Mills's storage space above a dry cleaner. The receptionist offered me coffee in a ceramic mug, not a paper cup. The magazines on the waiting room table were current month, not last year. Terrence Harper was a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He didn't smile when I entered, didn't offer pleasantries or small talk. He simply pointed to a chair across from his desk and said, "Sit, talk." I talked for 45 minutes. He interrupted twice. Once to ask about the date of my divorce, once to clarify the exact wording of Jasmine's emotional distress claim. Otherwise, he listened in silence, making occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he spent another hour reading through the documents I'd brought. The lawsuit, Jasmine's separate filing, my calendar records, the hotel receipts from Milwaukee. Finally, he set down his pen and looked at me over his glasses. "Ms. Washington, your ex-husband made a mistake. Several mistakes, actually. He's claiming an oral promise regarding real estate in Illinois. That's governed by the statute of frauds. Any agreement to transfer interest in real property must be in writing to be enforceable. His entire case rests on witnesses testifying to a verbal promise that, legally speaking, couldn't create an enforceable obligation even if it happened. But he has 3 witnesses. Witnesses who are apparently willing to perjure themselves by placing you at a location 90 miles from where you actually were. Terence tapped the hotel receipt. This is excellent documentation, but we need more. We need to prove not just that you weren't there, but that the promise was never made at all. How do we do that? We investigate. Your ex-husband and your daughter both have something to hide. Everyone does. We find it. He paused. There's also something odd about your daughter's claim. She's suing for $200,000 in emotional distress damages, claiming childhood mistreatment, but she's 38 years old and has been living rent-free in your house for years. If the mistreatment was so severe, why didn't she leave? It was the same question I'd been asking myself for a decade. I'll need a private investigator, Terence continued. Someone who specializes in financial backgrounds. I have a recommendation. Kyle Jenkins, former Chicago PD, now licensed PI. He charges $85 an hour. If your daughter is hiding assets or income, Kyle will find them. I hired Kyle Jenkins the next day. We met at a coffee shop on North Loop, his choice, a place where conversations blended into the ambient noise of espresso machines and laptop keyboards. Kyle was a stocky man with a military haircut and the watchful eyes of someone who'd spent years noticing things other people missed. He listened to my story without expression, then asked a single question. What does your daughter do for work? Nothing stable. She's had maybe 15 jobs in 20 years. Never lasted more than 6 months at any of them. And yet she lives in an $800,000 house and drives a car you mentioned is relatively new. A 2022 Honda Accord. My car, technically. I let her use it. Kyle wrote something in a small notebook. Interesting. I'll start with public records. Corporate filings, property records, anything with her name on it. Give me 2 weeks. While Kyle investigated, I did something I'd been putting off for 8 years. I went through my archives. In the closet of my apartment, I had 17 boxes of documents dating back to 1985. Tax returns, receipts, contracts, correspondence, everything I'd ever signed, paid, or received, organized by year. My former colleagues at the IRS used to joke that I could reconstruct my entire life from paper trails. They weren't wrong. I started with 2017, the year of the divorce. Box by box, folder by folder, I searched for anything related to Marcus, to the house, to any agreement we might have made. On April 8th, at 11:47 p.m., I found it. A manila envelope tucked between tax documents and utility bills, labeled in my own handwriting, divorce final. I didn't remember putting it there. I didn't remember what was inside. My hands were steady as I opened it. The hands of a woman who had opened 10,000 suspicious documents in her career. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. I unfolded it and began to read. The document was dated August 22, 2017, 5 weeks after the date Marcus claimed I made my oral promise. It was a notarized statement, typed on legal paper, with Marcus's signature at the bottom. The notary seal was from Cook County, Illinois. The stamp was crisp and official. The text read, I, Marcus Washington, hereby acknowledge and affirm that the property located at 3847 Ashland Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, is the sole and separate property of Ernestine Washington, acquired by her prior to our marriage. I relinquish any and all claims to said property now and in perpetuity. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down on my bedroom floor and laughed until my eyes watered. I remembered now. August 2017, the final weeks of our divorce negotiations. Marcus had wanted to avoid a court battle. Too painful, too public, he'd said. The deal was simple. He would sign a statement confirming the house was mine. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue the $45,000 he'd transferred from our joint account to his personal account the month before filing. I'd forgotten about this document. 8 years of distance had buried it under layers of newer papers. Marcus had clearly forgotten too, or assumed I'd thrown it away. He'd always criticized my habit of keeping useless papers. Turns out no paper is useless if you wait long enough. The next morning, I brought the document to Terence Harper. He examined it for 15 minutes, checking the notary seal, the signatures, the paper quality. "This is gold," he finally said. "Absolute gold. This single document destroys their entire case." Marcus signed a legal statement acknowledging your sole ownership 5 weeks after he supposedly received a verbal promise that you'd give him the house. He set the paper down carefully. "But we're not going to use it yet." "Why not?" "Because right now they think they're winning. They think you're a confused old woman with a bad lawyer and no evidence. Let them commit to their story. Deepen their lies. Involve more witnesses. The more they invest in this fraud, the harder they'll fall." It was a hunter's logic. Set the trap, bait it properly, and wait for the prey to walk in. "What about my daughter's lawsuit?" I asked. "That's where things get interesting." Terence pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "Kyle Jenkins's preliminary report came this morning. Your daughter Jasmine has been busier than she let on." He handed me a printout. A Delaware corporate filing for JW Solutions LLC. Registered agent, Jasmine Washington. Formation date, March 2022. It's a dropshipping company. Online retail where the seller never handles inventory. Orders come in through a website, get forwarded to a supplier who ships directly to the customer. Terence flipped to the next page. JW Solutions processed approximately $178,000 in revenue last year. I stared at the number. My daughter, who couldn't hold a job, who'd borrowed $12,000 9 years ago and never paid it back, who was suing me for emotional damages, was running a business making nearly $200,000 a year. "She's not reporting this income," I said. "Not a penny of it. No Schedule C on her personal returns. No corporate tax filings for the LLC." Kyle found bank statements showing regular deposits from payment processors, Stripe, PayPal, but no corresponding tax documentation. I did the math automatically, the way I'd done it countless times in IRS interview rooms. $178,000 in unreported income. Self-employment tax plus federal income tax at her bracket. She owes the IRS approximately $47,000, plus penalties and interest if they audit her. That's Kyle's estimate as well. Terence closed the folder. "Your daughter is suing you for childhood trauma while hiding a small fortune from the federal government. The irony is remarkable." I thought about Jasmine at that dinner table, telling me I should die faster. About the loans never repaid, jobs never kept, excuses never ending. The daughter who blamed me for every failure while secretly building a business she'd never mentioned. What do we do with this information? For now, nothing. We document everything and wait. When the time comes, we'll have options. Terence stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Ms. Washington, your ex-husband and daughter aren't just trying to take your assets. They fabricated evidence, recruited false witnesses, filed fraudulent claims. That's not a family dispute. That's a coordinated attack." He walked me to the door. "I'm going to enjoy dismantling them." That night, I sat in my apartment with the notarized document before me. Chicago's skyline glittered through the window, 10,000 lights, each one someone else's story. I thought about Marcus's confidence when he'd slid that envelope across my table. He'd been so certain I would crumble. Kyle Jenkins called just before midnight. "Ms. Washington, I've got something else. Your daughter's been making payments. $3,000 a month to a Delaware address. Might have a silent partner. Want me to dig deeper?" "Yes," I said. "Dig until you hit bedrock." I hung up and looked at the document again. Marcus's signature, neat and precise. The notary's seal, undeniable. He'd handed me the weapon that would end his case, and he didn't even remember doing it. The counterattack came on April 28th, exactly 3 weeks after I'd hired Terence Harper. I was in my apartment sorting through another box of old documents when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Check your email. You've been served. The email contained a court filing from Victoria Sanders, Marcus and Jasmine's attorney. I'd researched her after seeing her name on their lawsuit. 45 years old, aggressive reputation, known in Chicago legal circles as the Pitbull. She took cases on contingency, which meant she only got paid if she won. That made her dangerous. She had every incentive to fight dirty. The filing was a motion for lease pendens, a legal notice that freezes a property during litigation. Effectively, I could no longer sell, refinance, or transfer my house until the lawsuit was resolved. Sanders was locking down my assets before I could move them. It was a smart move, I had to admit. Aggressive but smart. The kind of legal maneuver that tells your opponent you're not interested in negotiating. You're interested in winning. I forwarded the document to Terence. His response came within minutes. Expected. Don't worry. We'll handle it. But Sanders wasn't done. The next morning, I woke up to 17 text messages. Most were from former colleagues at the IRS, people I'd worked with for decades, people who had respected me. The messages all asked variations of the same question. Ernestine, is this true? Jasmine had posted on Facebook. The post was 3 paragraphs long, written with the practiced tone of someone who'd rehearsed their victimhood. She described growing up with an emotionally absent mother who valued money over family. She talked about years of psychological manipulation and financial control tactics. She ended with a plea. I'm finally standing up for myself and my father. If you've ever supported us, please share this story. 214 likes. 47 shares. Comments from Marcus's friends calling me a monster and a narcissist. One comment read, "So brave of you to speak your truth, Jasmine. Your mother should be ashamed." Another said, "Praying for you and Marcus during this difficult time." I read through every word, every comment, every accusation. My hands were steady. My pulse didn't rise. I'd spent 30 years watching people lie professionally. Jasmine's Facebook post was amateur hour compared to the corporate fraudsters I'd interrogated. But it still hurt. Not the lies themselves, but the efficiency of them. How quickly people I'd known for years were willing to believe the worst about me based on nothing but my daughter's carefully crafted narrative. 30 years of honest work, and a single social media post could make strangers think I was a villain. My phone rang. A number I recognized. Martha Chin, my former supervisor at the IRS Chicago office. "Ernestine," she said carefully. "I saw Jasmine's post. I wanted to ask you directly. Is any of this true?" "No, Martha. None of it." A pause. "Okay. I believe you. But you should know people are talking. Some of them aren't sure what to think. Let them talk," I said. "The truth will come out in court." Terence Harper called an hour later. I saw the Facebook post. "Don't respond publicly. Anything you say can be used against you. Instead, we're going to respond legally." He filed 2 motions that afternoon. The first was a counterclaim to validate the 2017 notarized document, a formal request for the court to recognize Marcus's written acknowledgement that the house was my sole property. The second was a defamation lawsuit against Jasmine, $50,000 in damages for the Facebook post. In Illinois, defamation per se applies when someone falsely accuses another of criminal conduct or moral turpitude. Jasmine's post accused me of psychological abuse. That qualified. "This will get their attention," Terence said. "They thought you'd fold. They thought you'd accept some settlement to make the embarrassment go away. Now they know you're fighting back." But I had one more card to play. That evening, I sat at my laptop and opened the IRS whistleblower submission portal. Form 211, Application for Award for Original Information. The form allows citizens to report tax fraud and potentially receive a percentage of any taxes recovered. I filled it out carefully, the way I'd taught hundreds of agents to do over 3 decades. Jasmine's name. Her LLC. The unreported income. The estimated tax liability of $47,000. This wasn't revenge. This was the law. Jasmine had evaded taxes on nearly $200,000. Any citizen who discovered that information had a legal right, arguably a duty, to report it. I submitted the form at 11:47 p.m. and closed my laptop. Outside my window, Chicago was still awake. Traffic sounds, distant music, the hum of a city that never quite slept. Terrence called the next morning, his voice tight. Victoria Sanders just contacted me. She says, and I quote, "Your client wants a war, she'll get one." We found a 4th witness. The 4th witness was Derek Coleman. I knew Derek. He'd lived next door to us on Ashland Avenue for 15 years. A pleasant man in his late 50s who'd always waved from his porch and brought over holiday cookies. He'd moved to a condo near downtown after his wife passed in 2020. According to Sanders' filing, Derek was prepared to testify under oath that he'd overheard a conversation between Marcus and me in the summer of 2017. Specifically, he claimed he'd heard me say, "This house is yours, Marcus. I'm leaving it to you." Terrence Harper studied the deposition notice with narrowed eyes. Another witness placing you at a conversation that allegedly happened on July 15, 2017, the same date you were 90 miles away in Milwaukee. Derek wasn't part of Marcus's poker group, I said. He barely knew those men, which makes him more credible than the other 3. A neighbor with no obvious connection to the plaintiff. Terrence set the paper down. We need to investigate him. Kyle Jenkins should start immediately. Kyle's report came back in 10 days. Derek Coleman owed Marcus $8,500. A personal loan from 2019, documented in a text message exchange Kyle had obtained through legal discovery. Derek had promised to repay it as soon as I get back on my feet. 4 years later, he hadn't paid back a penny. That's motive, Terrence said, tapping the printout with satisfaction. He lies for Marcus. Marcus forgives the debt. Classic quid pro quo. But there was something else bothering me. I remembered that summer of 2017, the weeks before the divorce was finalized. Marcus and I had argued on the porch one evening. Derek had been watering his lawn next door. He could have overheard us. But what had I actually said? I closed my eyes and tried to reconstruct the memory. The heat of that July evening. Marcus's tears, real ones that time, or at least convincing. My own exhaustion after months of negotiations. And then, yes. I remembered my exact words. "This house is everything I have left, Marcus. I'm not leaving it to you. Not, I'm leaving it to you." The opposite. One word changed, and the entire meaning reversed. Derek had either misheard or was deliberately lying. Given the $8,500 debt, I knew which option was more likely. Terrence filed a subpoena for Derek Coleman's financial records on May 25. We would see exactly what Marcus had paid him, and when. 4 days later, my phone rang at 7:14 a.m. The caller ID showed Jasmine Washington. I answered. "Hello, Jasmine." "Mom." Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Tight, strained, with an edge of panic underneath the words. "Mom, I just got a letter from the IRS. They're auditing me. They're auditing my business." I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, then 10. I could hear her breathing on the other end, waiting for me to say something. Anything. "Jasmine, I worked at the IRS for 30 years. I know. That's why I'm calling. Did you do this? Did you report me? If I wanted to hurt you, daughter, you'd already be in prison. The IRS doesn't need my help to find unreported income. They have algorithms for that. Software that flags discrepancies between payment processor records and tax filings. This is insane. They're asking for 3 years of records. Bank statements, invoices, everything. Then I suggest you find a good tax attorney. The penalties for willful failure to file can be severe. We're talking about 25% of the unpaid tax, plus interest, plus potential criminal charges if they determine intent. Mom, please. You sued me for emotional abuse, Jasmine. You told the internet I was a monster. You're trying to take my house, my cars, my retirement. I kept my voice calm, almost pleasant. And now you're asking me for help because the consequences of your own choices are catching up with you. The line went silent. When Jasmine spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Did you do this? Goodbye, Jasmine. I hung up and set the phone on my kitchen table. My coffee was still warm. The morning light filtered through the blinds. It was a beautiful day. Terence Harper called that afternoon with news of his own. We have a problem, Ms. Washington. I just found out who's been assigned to your case. Judge Harold Pierce. Is that significant? Judge Pierce and Victoria Sanders play golf together. At least 12 times in the past 2 years. Kyle found photos on Instagram. They're not just acquaintances. They're friends. I absorbed this information the way I'd absorbed 1,000 unexpected complications in audit cases. Calmly, analytically. Can we request a different judge? We can file a motion for recusal based on conflict of interest, but it's risky. Judges don't like being accused of bias. If the motion fails, Pierce might hold it against us throughout the trial. What are our chances if we don't file? Terence's pause told me everything. With Pierce on the bench and Sanders as opposing counsel? Not good. They'll know each other's strategies. They'll have a rapport that we can't match. I thought about Marcus and Jasmine, confident in their lies. About Victoria Sanders building her case on fabricated evidence and purchased witnesses. About a system that was supposed to deliver justice but was riddled with personal connections and quiet favors. File the motion, I said. Let's see if the system can be made to work honestly. The motion to recuse Judge Harold Pierce was filed on June 18, 2025. Terence Harper had compiled a meticulous dossier. 12 photographs from Victoria Sanders' Instagram account showing her and Judge Pierce on various golf courses around Chicago. Timestamps, location tags, comments from mutual friends joking about their Wednesday tradition. One photo caption read, "Another great round with my favorite judge. Harold owes me $20. This is either going to work brilliantly or blow up in our faces," Terence said as he submitted the filing. Judges protect their own. Pierce might have friends on the review panel. The response came faster than either of us expected. 3 days later, the Cook County Circuit Court issued a ruling. Judge Harold Pierce was removed from Washington versus Washington due to the appearance of impropriety. The case was reassigned to Judge Elizabeth Carter. I researched Judge Carter that same evening. 58 years old, appointed to the bench in 2009, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. One legal blog described her as the judge who makes lawyers wish they'd prepared better. Another called her brutally fair. She'll rule against you if you're wrong, no matter how sympathetic your story is. Terence was pleased. Carter doesn't play favorites. She follows the law and the evidence. That's exactly what we need. But Sanders wasn't giving up. The day after the reassignment, she filed a motion to dismiss our defamation counterclaim, arguing that Jasmine's Facebook post was protected opinion rather than actionable defamation. Terence shot it down in his response brief, citing 3 Illinois precedents where similar posts had been ruled defamatory. Judge Carter denied Sanders' motion in 48 hours. Meanwhile, the IRS audit was tightening around Jasmine like a slowly closing fist. I heard about her troubles secondhand. Kyle Jenkins had contacts who could track court filings and financial movements without breaking any laws. By late June, Jasmine had hired a tax attorney. The attorney had reviewed her records and delivered the bad news. Jasmine owed $47,000 in back taxes, plus $14,100 in penalties and interest. Total, $61,100, due by October 15th. Her dropshipping business had essentially collapsed. According to Kyle, Jasmine hadn't processed a single order in 3 weeks. She was too distracted by the audit, too consumed by damage control to actually run her company. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt. Just the cold clarity of watching consequences unfold. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for July 15th, exactly 8 years to the day after the oral promise Marcus claimed I had made. The irony was not lost on me. I arrived at the Cook County Courthouse at 8:45 a.m., wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to hundreds of IRS interviews. Terrence Harper met me in the hallway outside courtroom 4B. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ready," I said. "I've been ready for months." Marcus and Jasmine were already inside, seated at the plaintiff's table with Victoria Sanders. Marcus wore a pale blue shirt, soft, designed to make him look vulnerable. His expression was carefully neutral. He looked like a man who had been wronged. The performance was flawless. I almost admired it. Jasmine sat beside him, stiff and pale. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her, the stress of the lawsuit and the audit carving lines into her face that hadn't been there before. She didn't look at me when I entered. Judge Carter called the hearing to order at precisely 9 a.m. Sanders went first, presenting her case with the confidence of a woman who'd done this 1,000 times. The oral promise, the witnesses, the alleged pattern of financial control during my marriage to Marcus. Then Terrence stood up. "Your Honor, before we proceed, the defense would like to address a matter of evidence." He held up a manila folder. "We have documentation proving that on July 15, 2017, the date the plaintiff claims the oral promise was made, the defendant was 90 miles away, attending a professional conference in Milwaukee." He handed copies to the judge and to Sanders. I watched her face as she read, the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible pause before she continued breathing normally. "These are hotel receipts, conference registration records, and credit card statements," Terrence continued. "They establish beyond any reasonable doubt that Ms. Washington could not have been present for the conversation Mr. Washington describes." Judge Carter examined the documents. "Ms. Sanders' response?" Sanders recovered quickly. "Your Honor, the plaintiff may have been mistaken about the exact date. The substance of the promise is what matters. The substance of a promise that allegedly occurred on a specific date?" Judge Carter's voice was dry. "A date that has been central to the plaintiff's entire filing." Marcus's composure flickered. Just for a moment. A quick glance at Sanders. A flash of something that might have been fear. It was the first crack in his perfect facade, and I intended to make it wider. The subpoena results arrived on July 2nd, exactly 1 week after the preliminary hearing. Terrence Harper spread the documents across his conference table like a surgeon laying out instruments. Bank statements, transaction records, wire transfers. Derek Coleman's entire financial history for the past 3 years. "Look at this." Terrence pointed to a highlighted entry from March 12, 2025. "Marcus Washington transferred $3,000 to Derek Coleman 1 week after filing the lawsuit against you." I leaned forward. The transfer was labeled gift in the memo line. "That's not a gift," I said. "That's payment. It gets better." Terrence flipped to another page. Derek also received $1,500 from Marcus in April and another $2,000 in May. Total, $6,500, in addition to the original $8,500 debt that Derek already owed. Marcus was paying his witness, and doing it badly. Every transaction is documented. Every payment leaves a trail. Terrence smiled, a thin, predatory expression that reminded me why I'd hired him. But the real prize is here. He handed me a printout of text messages. Kyle Jenkins had obtained them through legal discovery. Marcus and Derek discussing their arrangement in language that was damning without being explicitly criminal. One message from Marcus, dated March 10th, stood out. Ernestine will never find that document. I'm sure she threw it out years ago. She never kept anything important. He was talking about the notarized statement from 2017. The document he'd signed acknowledging my sole ownership of the house. The document he'd assumed I'd discarded. The document that was now the centerpiece of our defense. He knew, I said quietly. He knew the document existed, and he bet everything on me not having kept it. He underestimated you, Terrence said. Most people do. The confrontation with Jasmine came 2 weeks later. I was in my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, working on a pocket watch, a 1938 Hamilton that needed a new mainspring. The knock on my door was aggressive, demanding. I opened it to find my daughter standing in the hallway, her face flushed with anger. Can I help you, Jasmine? You destroyed my life. Her voice was shaking. The IRS audit. That was you. I know it was you. The IRS audits thousands of businesses every year. Most of them don't take it personally. I have to pay $61,000. $61,000. I don't have that kind of money. Then perhaps you shouldn't have hidden $178,000 in unreported income. Jasmine's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought she might swing at me. Part of me almost hoped she would. Assault charges would make an excellent addition to our countersuit. But she controlled herself, barely. I'll drop the lawsuit, she said. Everything. Dad's case, my case, all of it. Just help me with the IRS. You know people. You can make this go away. I studied my daughter. This 38-year-old woman who had never held a job for more than 6 months, who had borrowed money she never repaid, who had told me I should die faster so she could inherit my assets. Jasmine, do you know why I spent 30 years at the IRS? She blinked, confused by the change in direction. What? Because I believe in fairness. In consequences. In the idea that everyone, rich or poor, powerful or ordinary, has to play by the same rules. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my voice conversational. You broke those rules. You hid income. You evaded taxes. And then you sued me for made-up trauma to try to take what I had earned honestly. And now you want me to fix it for you. Mom, you didn't come here because you're sorry. You came because you're losing. I stepped back and began to close the door. The answer is no. You'll regret this. Jasmine's voice cracked with desperation. Dad has something else. Something that will change everything. A letter you wrote him, promising the house. I paused. A letter from 2016. In your handwriting. He's been saving it for the right moment. Jasmine's smile was ugly, triumphant despite her fear. You think you've won? You haven't seen anything yet. I closed the door in her face and listened to her footsteps retreat down the hallway. Then I called Terrence Harper. They have something new, I said. A letter, supposedly from me. Dated 2016. Terrence's voice was sharp. Did you write any such letter? Never. Not a word. Then it's either a forgery or a fabrication. A pause. Which means they're getting desperate enough to manufacture evidence. This could be very good for us, or very dangerous. I'll have Kyle look into it immediately. I hung up and looked at the pocket watch on my workbench. The old Hamilton, with its broken mainspring, waiting to be repaired. Everything breaks eventually. The trick is knowing which pieces can be fixed and which ones were broken from the start. The letter arrived at Terrence Harper's office on September 8th, delivered by Victoria Sanders with all the theatrical flourish of a woman presenting her winning hand. Terrence called me immediately. You need to see this. I drove to his office on Michigan Avenue, the late summer heat rising from the Chicago pavement in visible waves. Inside, Terence had the letter spread out on his conference table, handling it with latex gloves as if it were evidence at a crime scene, which I suspected it might become. Supposedly written by you in December 2016, he said, addressed to Marcus. It says, and I quote, "I promise that after my death, the house at 3847 Ashland Avenue will be yours. This is my gift to you for the years we shared together." I looked at the letter. The handwriting was a reasonable approximation of mine. Someone had clearly studied my signature. But I knew I hadn't written these words. I had never made such a promise, never even considered it. The signature, I said. Look at the way the E connects to the W in Ernestine. I haven't written my name that way in decades. I changed my signature style around 2005 after a seminar on document security. I noticed the same thing. Terence pointed to a section at the bottom. And the paper. Feel how crisp it is. This is supposed to be 9 years old. Paper that age shows wear, yellowing, the faint brittleness of oxidation. This looks like it was printed last month. Because it probably was. Terence nodded slowly. I'm sending it to a forensic document examiner. Dr. Margaret Chen. She's testified in over 200 cases. Unimpeachable credentials. If this is a forgery, she'll prove it. The wait was agonizing. 3 weeks of uncertainty while Dr. Chen conducted her analysis. 3 weeks of knowing that Marcus had produced a document I'd never written but not being able to prove it. I spent those weeks organizing my evidence, preparing for trial, and trying not to think about what would happen if the expert couldn't definitively prove the forgery. The results came back on October 2nd. Dr. Chen's report was devastating for Marcus. The signature had been digitally copied from a check I'd written in 2018, then printed onto the letter. The analysis showed telltale signs of digital manipulation, pixel artifacts, inconsistent ink density, and a slight geometric distortion that occurs when images are resized. More damning still, the paper itself contained optical brighteners that weren't commercially available until 2022. Marcus had forged a document. He hadn't just lied. He hadn't just recruited false witnesses and bribed them with money. He had manufactured physical evidence and submitted it to a court of law. This was no longer a civil dispute about property. This was criminal fraud. This is fraud upon the court, Terence said, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. A felony in Illinois. If we report this to the district attorney, Marcus could face up to 2 years in prison. What are our options? We can offer Sanders a choice. Withdraw all claims immediately and we don't pursue criminal charges, or we go to trial, present this evidence, and let the DA decide whether to prosecute. I thought about Marcus, the man I'd married, the father of my daughter, the person who had shared my bed for over 20 years. I thought about the calculated cruelty of his plan. The false witnesses, the lies about oral promises, and now a forged document designed to steal everything I'd built. Give Sanders 48 hours to respond, I said. Then we go to trial regardless. Terence delivered the ultimatum on October 3rd. The deadline passed on October 5th without a response. On the morning of October 6th, Terence received a text message from Victoria Sanders. We're going to the end. See you in court. I read the message over his shoulder. She thinks she can still win. She thinks she has nothing to lose, Terence corrected. She's on contingency. If they lose, she doesn't get paid regardless. And Marcus is too committed to his lies to back down now. When's the trial? October 20th. Judge Carter moved it up. She doesn't like cases that drag on. Terence gathered his files. Ms. Washington, I've been a lawyer for 27 years. I've never seen anyone walk into a courtroom with forged evidence that's already been exposed. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Kyle Jenkins delivered his final reports. Terence rehearsed his arguments. I organized every piece of evidence into chronological order. On October 19th, the night before the trial, I sat alone and looked at Marcus's notarized statement from 2017, the document that would end his lawsuit and possibly send him to prison. I felt no triumph, only the cold understanding that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom and watch Marcus's world collapse. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with the quiet certainty that justice, however imperfect, still meant something. The Cook County Courthouse stood at 50 West Washington Street, a building that had seen thousands of disputes resolved within its walls. On October 20, 2025, it would see the end of Washington versus Washington. I arrived at courtroom 4B at 8:30 a.m. Terrence Harper was already there, his files arranged with surgical precision. Across the aisle, Victoria Sanders sat with Marcus and Jasmine. Derek Coleman and the other witnesses occupied the gallery benches behind them. Marcus wore black, a strategic choice. The grieving ex-husband, the victim. Jasmine's face was pale, the weight of the IRS debt and the collapsing lawsuit etched into every line around her eyes. She looked like a woman who had finally realized she was going to lose. Judge Elizabeth Carter called the court to order at precisely 9 a.m. Sanders presented her case first, confident, articulate, weaving the narrative of a generous husband betrayed by a cold wife. She called her witnesses, the poker buddies who claimed they'd heard promises. Derek Coleman, who testified about the conversation on the porch. Then she presented the letter. Your Honor, the plaintiff submits Exhibit F, a letter written by the defendant in 2016, clearly stating her intention to leave the property to Mr. Washington. Terrence rose. Your Honor, the defense has serious concerns about the authenticity of this document. We request the opportunity to present expert testimony. Granted. Terrence called Dr. Margaret Chen to the stand. For 45 minutes, the forensic document examiner methodically dismantled the letter, the copied signature, the digital artifacts, the paper that couldn't have existed in 2016. I watched Sanders' face as she spoke. The color drained slowly, like water from a bathtub. Her pen stopped moving. Her shoulders slumped, almost imperceptibly. Marcus sat frozen across the aisle. His carefully constructed mask was cracking, piece by piece. In your expert opinion, Terrence asked, is this letter genuine? No, Dr. Chen said. This letter is a forgery, created no earlier than 2022. The courtroom went silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming in the ceiling. Terrence picked up the final exhibit. Your Honor, the defense submits Exhibit G, a notarized statement signed by Marcus Washington on August 22, 2017. He handed copies to the judge and to Sanders. I watched her read it. Her face went from pale to ash gray. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the page. This document shows that Mr. Washington acknowledged in writing, 5 weeks after the alleged oral promise, that the property at 3847 Ashland Avenue belongs solely to Ernestine Washington. He signed it. It was witnessed. It was notarized by a licensed official. Judge Carter looked at Marcus. Mr. Washington, did you sign this document? Marcus's voice was barely audible. I was under duress. Ernestine forced me. The notary testified in a deposition that Mr. Washington appeared voluntarily and was fully informed of the document's contents. Terrence interrupted smoothly. Marcus's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. His eyes darted to Jasmine, to Sanders, looking for help that wasn't coming. For the first time since the lawsuit began, he had nothing to say. Judge Carter announced her ruling at 11:47 a.m. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. The defendant's counterclaim for defamation is granted. Jasmine Washington is ordered to pay $50,000 in damages. Additionally, the court is referring evidence of document forgery to the Cook County District Attorney for potential criminal prosecution. I stood up from the defense table. Marcus was crying. Real tears this time, not the calculated manipulation I'd seen so many times before. These were the tears of someone who had finally run out of lies. Jasmine stared straight ahead, her face blank with shock. I walked toward them. Sanders stepped between us, but I wasn't there to gloat. I had only one thing to say. I spent 30 years catching people who thought they were smarter than the system. My voice was calm, almost gentle. You weren't even a challenge. I turned and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. 1 month later, I moved back into my house on Ashland Avenue. Marcus had vacated within a week of the ruling. The district attorney's investigation was ongoing, and he'd relocated to stay with his brother in Milwaukee. Jasmine had disappeared somewhere, scraping together money for the IRS debt and the $50,000 she now owed me. I found my workshop exactly as I'd left it. The 1942 Elgin pocket watch was still on the bench, waiting. I sat down, picked up my tools, and began to work. Numbers never lie. People lie constantly, creatively, with tremendous confidence. But if you're patient enough, careful enough, willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, the truth always comes out. I finished the repair as afternoon sun slanted through my workshop window. The watch ticked steadily, keeping perfect time after 8 decades of silence. I smiled, not because I had won, but because justice still existed for those willing to fight for it.